Whatever the intention of the person who leaked diplomatic cables from our ambassador in Washington, it has had profound consequences. The ambassador, Sir Kim Darroch, one of the government's most senior diplomats, has resigned, forced out by the response of the American president. He had described President Trump as inept and dysfunctional. That prompted a tirade of abuse from Mr. Trump, who tweeted yesterday that the ambassador was wacky, a very stupid guy, and a pompous fool. The resignation was announced just an hour ago, and the Prime Minister immediately said this at Prime Minister's questions.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I have spoken to Sir Kim Darroch. I have told him that it is a matter of great regret that he has felt it necessary to leave his position as ambassador in Washington. The whole Cabinet rightly gave its full support to Sir Kim on Tuesday. Sir Kim has given a lifetime of service to the United Kingdom, and we owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. Good government depends on public servants being able to give full and frank advice. I want all our public servants to have the confidence to be able to do that, and I hope the House will reflect on the importance of defending our values and principles, particularly when they are under pressure.
Well, in the Conservative leadership debate last night, the frontrunner Boris Johnson refused to say whether he would keep Sir Kim in his job if he became Prime Minister.
I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to
Thank
think
you.
that I'm going to be in a position to take that. But what I will say is that I and I alone will decide who takes important and politically sensitive jobs, such as the UK ambassador to the US.
Sir Nigel Sheinwald was one of Sir Kim's predecessors. He was British ambassador to the USA from 2007 until 2012, and he joins us now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Did Sir Kim Darroch get the support that he needed from across government?
I don't think he got the support he needed from across our political class, and I'm sure that those comments of Boris Johnson that you just played may well have played a factor in his ultimate decision to resign. I think the Prime Minister and others tried their best to offer their support to him, but the situation was rapidly getting out of control with the increasingly intemperate comments of President Trump. So I think that what worried him obviously was what would happen with a new Prime Minister who'd obviously made no commitment to him at all in the debate last night.
Did you speak to him?
I haven't spoken to him. I've been in touch with him, but I haven't spoken to him.
OK, but so have you heard that to be the case, that it was what he heard from the debate that sort of was the final straw?
I've seen it speculated about, and it wouldn't be an absurd reaction to the words that were used last night.
He was in a difficult situation. Was it inevitable that he would have to resign once his views were known?
No, I don't think it was. I think it was difficult once the president serially commented on him in the way that he did. I mean, no one believes that Kim Darroch is any of the things that you mentioned. He is not wacky, he is not pompous, he is not stupid. The fact that the president said so doesn't mean that it's correct or a widely held view. So I think that the leak was itself extremely unfortunate and clearly maliciously intended, not just towards Kim Darroch himself, but I think towards public servants and towards those who give their advice impartially to ministers. But I think what created the crisis, obviously, was the way that the president reacted to it. And that's what Kim said in his resignation letter, is that left him in an impossible position of being unable to support ministers and do his job in the way that he would like and the way that a professional would do it.
The top Foreign Office civil servant, Sir Simon MacDonald, is speaking to MPs in front of the Select Committee at the moment and has made the point that even with hostile states, we haven't had heads of state refuse to work with our ambassadors, which of course is what President Trump said in a tweet.
I think it was a remarkable set of reactions, and at the very best, it was a casual reaction to someone who represented the special relationship that President Trump said that he revered when he was here in the UK last month. So I hope this series of events does act as a bit of a wake-up call. I'm not sure that it will be a wake-up call on the other side of the Atlantic, but here I hope our politicians and ultimately the public realise that we have something to lose if we don't let civil servants and public servants give their advice honestly in public, and if we don't choose our own representatives to other countries, whether they are allies or foes.
So
Those seem to me to be two fundamental principles.
So how do you think the British government should be responding to President Trump?
Well, I think it goes back a little way. I think President Trump has perceived our weakness because of Brexit over the past couple of years, and I think there's been a series of affronts to the UK, which were tolerated at the time, and of course, even last month, although it was glossed over to some degree in the state visit, with the dazzle of the state visit, as Kim Darroch described it. Nevertheless, we have allowed him to talk about the UK in ways which were disparaging and disrespectful to us as a country. And I think had we had a stronger government, and our government obviously has not been at its best in the last couple of years, I think that there would have been a greater pushback against that some time ago, before we got into this crisis.
Sir Nigel Sheinwald, thank you very much. Well, listening to that here in the studio, Sir Simon Fraser, who was head of the diplomatic service until 2015, he appointed Sir Kim Darroch as ambassador to Washington. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I didn't actually appoint him because he started at the beginning of January 16, but it's been very clear in Whitehall that he was going to take the job with the support of the Foreign Office, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister at the time.
Thank you for that correction. Have you spoken to him?
I haven't spoken to him, no.
What do you make of his decision? Did he have no choice?
Well, I think actually Kim has done the honourable thing. He has dealt with and taken responsibility for a very difficult set of circumstances which were not of his making, but which did indeed make his position untenable. And in the best tradition of British public service, he's taken responsibility and tried to resolve the problem.
One of your predecessors, Peter Ricketts, has tweeted that he has been taken out by an act of political sabotage. Do you agree with that?
Well, he has been taken out by the fact that somebody irresponsibly leaked these documents for whatever reason, possibly politically motivated, and that person has a lot to answer for, not least ending Kim's very distinguished career. So that person is responsible, and the other person who's responsible, as Nigel Sheinwald has said, is President Trump, who has overreacted in a very personalised way against Kim in really what was rather an undignified response, which again, as Kim said, put him in an impossible position. Does Boris Johnson also bear some responsibility for not supporting him? Well, I think it's regrettable that Boris Johnson didn't support him clearly in the debate because, we appoint our ambassadors to go overseas to represent the country, to represent the government. Although Boris Johnson is not a member of this government, he has been a minister, he has been Foreign Secretary, he knows what this is all about and how diplomacy works, and I think it would have been appropriate for him to support the ambassador. What should happen now with the inquiry? Because there are very different ways of trying to get to the bottom of a leak, and you can call in GCHQ, you can call in agencies, you can make it criminal, you can get people's mobile phones. Is that what is required now to establish who was behind this leak? Well, I definitely think the inquiry should go forward because, as we've seen, this has had really damaging consequences, personally for Kim and for the country and for our system of government and diplomacy. It may take some time. They have to find out exactly what was leaked, trace that to who would have seen those documents, the circulations of those documents, and then by technical means and by interviewing people, try to identify the person responsible. It could take some time. These investigations do not always reach a conclusion. I hope this one does, and I hope that somebody's held to account. Is it possible? I wonder, is it always possible to find, if you have the political will, to find who was behind it? It's not always possible to find because sometimes there isn't clear evidence and very many people are potentially involved. But political will, you're right, is important. And I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will be very keen to make sure that this process is carried out with rigour. What does the British government need to do now to try to claw back from this? One obvious thing is that the UK needs a new ambassador. Should that be appointed by the current Prime Minister? Well, I mean, there are different things that we need to do. First of all, as Nigel Sheinwald has said, we need to learn the lessons from this about what's happening to our system of government. The loss of trust, the loss of discipline in government is very damaging, and we should all be very concerned about that. On the specific issue of the relationship with the United States, I think the best thing now, Kim having admirably taken responsibility, he's created a bit of space. We should now go ahead with the leadership election of the Conservative Party, get the new Prime Minister, and then put in place a process for appointing Kim's successor. And that should be done carefully, with due process, through the system, with the approval of the Foreign Office and the Foreign Secretary and the new Prime Minister, not the individual choice of one person, the Prime Minister, but so that the system as a whole is clear that a duly, properly qualified person is appointed to that job.
Properly qualified, does that mean somebody who's already in the civil service, in the Foreign Office?
I think it would be a good idea for this to be a professional diplomat. William Hague himself said that yesterday when asked to comment on it. What we need in any case is somebody who is qualified to do the job, who is objective, dispassionate, will represent the interests of the country and not their own individual agenda. And that's what diplomats do.
Whoever leaked this, what reason do you think they had to leak it?
I don't know. I don't think I can speculate in detail because I don't know who it was. But it is possible that it came from a political source for political motivations, whatever they may have been, whether it was to destabilise Kim or the civil service, or to create a situation in which his successor may be from a particular persuasion. Whatever, those are all possible motives, but we don't know at the moment.
Sir Simon Fraser, thank you very much. Well, listening to that and joining us now is the Minister responsible for the Americas as well as Europe. He's Sir Alan Duncan. He, I should mention, is a supporter of Jeremy Hunt to be Prime Minister. Good afternoon, Sir Alan. What are can I pick up where Sir Simon just ended there, which is the motivation of whoever was responsible for this leak? What is your thinking? Because that, of course, plays into what should happen, what has happened, and, of course, what should happen next.
Well, it sort of plays into it. I mean, it's very difficult to analyse the motivation. It's not in the national interest. It is a very unpatriotic, illicit thing to have done. And what the motivation was, I don't think matters nearly as much as an analysis of the conduct of people. There's the leaker. The conduct of Sir Kim Darroch has been exemplary all the way through this. I mean, he's done nothing wrong. He's done his job in a perfectly excellent way. And then, by deciding to resign for the good of the country, when basically there's no justification for him having to do so, is a final act of duty we should all admire. So it's the leaker, but also the reaction of politicians. The reaction of politicians has been the Foreign Secretary supported him, the Prime Minister has, the Cabinet has, pretty well the entire House of Commons has. Boris Johnson has not, and unfortunately Kim has bitten the dust, and I think it's very, very sad, and I think it's rather humiliating for the UK that it has not been totally unanimous supporting him from this end.
Do you think Sir Kim resigned because he didn't get the support from Boris Johnson?
Well, a lot of people are speculating that, but what is clear is that he did not get the support of Boris Johnson, and it would appear that out of selfish motives he just wants to ingratiate himself to the President in the hope that he's the next Prime Minister, and threw Kim Darroch under the bus.
Well, let's hear him now, because he has just recently responded to the resignation of Sir Kim. Here he is speaking in the last half hour.
I just heard that Kim Darroch resigned, and I want to say that I regret that, really, because I think he was a superb diplomat, and I worked with him for many years, and I think that whoever leaked his diptels really has done a grave disservice to our civil servants, to people who give impartial advice to ministers, and I hope that whoever did it is run down, caught and eviscerated, quite frankly.
Sir Alan?
I think that is insincere guff.
Why? How can you say that?
Because he failed to support him, and it's quite clear that his priorities are different. So I'm afraid I have clearly formed the judgment that Boris Johnson has not behaved well on this. He's not behaved as a leader should. He has not behaved in our national interest, and I say it again, has thrown Kim Darroch under the bus.
Would you call his actions dishonourable then in not supporting him?
Oh, I don't want to bandy around words like that. My analysis is clear, and I think everyone will think that I've expressed it in no uncertain terms.
What needs to happen now with the investigation?
Well, it's going to be difficult, but I'm confident that the Cabinet Office and the Foreign Office are doing everything they can to see if they can trace the leak. This is a fairly low classification series of documents, which mean that they went to quite a wide distribution list. And indeed, the contents are pretty innocuous and mild, and in no way justified the fury and explosive response from the president. I see all of Kim Darroch's telegrams, and if one were to study them in their entirety over the last 2 years, the president, if he were to read them, I think would be rather impressed and would not be angry at all.
This morning, and we're going to hear it shortly, an interview I did with a former American ambassador to the EU, Anthony Gardner, who basically says Britain needs to stand up to the US more and call out President Trump's language. Do you accept that the government hasn't been as strong as it should have been?
No, I think the government has been very strong indeed, but Boris Johnson has not.
Couldn't the government have said more, as Anthony Gardner, we'll hear it shortly, says they should have done when there's language like this from President Trump?
Well, one has to tread very carefully with a very unique president who doesn't follow the normal or the norms of diplomatic behaviour ever. So, you do have to customise your reaction to the individual characteristics of President Trump.
But that's probably what Boris Johnson would say that he's doing.
I don't think so. Because the career, standing and dignity of our ambassador was at stake. And by sacrificing him, he has sacrificed a corner of British interest. That is my objection. He has actually not defended our own country, his own country. That's what I object to.
What do you think will happen to communications between ambassadors and the government if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister?
Well, I think the communications will continue. We have a supreme diplomatic network with people of the highest integrity. It's one of our greatest qualities that's recognised across the world. And they will continue to report back to London with the professional sort of quality that they always have done. But we will have to guard against leaks. And it may be that if you can't trust people not to leak, you have to make sure fewer people see the bits of paper. But that would be a pity as well, because the information becomes more narrowly handled. So this does come at a cost, and I'm afraid I am unrestrained in my condemnation of Isabel Oakeshott for releasing these documents. To do so in the name of journalism when it's done so much damage.
The Mail on Sunday journalist
Indeed.
who got the leak.
I mean, to do so supposedly because journalists can do these things and so have to do these things is not the same as actually making a judgment about whether it's going to do damage to the national interest.
Sir Alan Duncan, thank you very much. Well, as I mentioned there, a former US ambassador has said that Britain needs to stand up for itself more against President Trump. He's Anthony Gardner. He was US ambassador to the EU between 2014 and 2017. And I spoke to him, but it was shortly before we heard that Sir Kim Darroch had resigned.
I've interacted with the British diplomatic corps, not only during my 3 years in Brussels, but actually beforehand when I was in the White House under Clinton. I think it is arguably the best diplomatic service in the world. I would hate to see that service damaged in any way.
And what, could it be damaged by perhaps something like this where there isn't a strong enough defence of the British ambassador?
Well, by politicising the civil service. These are professionals who are serving any party in power, and in doing so loyally to the best of their abilities. The same applies also for the United States. It is, when I served, I didn't consider it to be, serving just one party. We were serving the country. So if you send the wrong signal, i.e. that a foreign country can suddenly say to you, the United Kingdom, we want someone else and we're not going to deal with the person you sent because he said things we don't like, that really undermines the efficiency, the efficacy of your diplomatic service, which is, as I said, an enormous asset.
So the fact that Boris Johnson, the front-runner to be the next Prime Minister, repeatedly in the debate last night refused to back the diplomat,
I would have defended Kim Darroch and his ability to speak his mind. A lot of bigger issues are at stake here.
The other thing that came out in the debate last night from Boris Johnson was the suggestion that he referred to it if ministers leak. Of course, we don't know where the leak come from. Did you presume it was from a minister?
Well, I have no way of presuming one thing or another, but, in a way, that's the story is, who did leak this and for what purpose? We are living, in the words of a columnist recently in the Financial Times, in an era of religious warfare, in which if it is the case that someone leaked because the ambassador is perceived to be friendly to the Remain camp, that would be truly troubling, because then we are indeed living in an era of religious warfare where people who hold particular views are at risk. And, we live in democracies where the principles of free speech should be upheld.
The US president, of course, tweeted some very strong language yesterday, not just about the ambassador, who he described as wacky and stupid, but also about the current Prime Minister, Theresa May, her failed Brexit negotiation. She went her own foolish way. How bad are relations between the two countries at the moment?
Well, look, they'll always be good for the broader reasons, right? Because our interests are aligned regardless of who is running the government on either side of the Atlantic. That's for sure. So this will blow over. But the language really is extraordinary. And I think it is unacceptable. I would like to see more people stand up and say, I'm sorry. With all of the respect one should pay to the office of the President of the United States, this is unacceptable language, and it is unprecedented. There may be some people who think that Trump is fantastic for the UK, but I think it opens up the point that there are some deep divides between the two countries right now. This country needs to be very clear-eyed that Donald Trump actually does not share some very fundamental policy interests that this country wants to pursue.
Is Britain being supine?
I wouldn't use those words. I would never use those words. The UK has an interest in maintaining close, strong relationship with the United States.
Sure, but what words would you use then?
I think you should defend its interests like any sovereign government. Look, let's face it.
And it's not doing that at the moment?
Well, every person will make his own decision, but the president actually represents things this country does not agree with. So I was rather surprised that the UK actually had offered a state visit to Donald Trump in those circumstances.
And what would you have them do now to make clear that they disagree with his policies?
Well, I would like to hear the government say, we will defend our civil service. And I would like to see this country say more clearly that on issues of free trade, the UK believes in free trade, not managed trade. We will defend the climate change agreement. We will defend the Iran agreement that the UK helped to negotiate. There are a whole series of issues where the UK needs to be very clear, respectful at all times, but very clear where it disagrees with Washington.
The former US Ambassador, Tony Gardner.